Alright, so today I'm going to talk about why enforced minimalism, it's easy for me to say on a Sunday, enforced minimalism, right, is transforming lives. Right, and what do I mean by that? Well, I'll just give you my backstory quickly. I think probably about 9 years ago, I read a book by David Henry Thoreau, who's a really famous essayist, philosopher from America from about 160, 70 years ago. And he wrote this book called Into the Woods or Wouldnt, which I urge you all to read. It's the most beautiful book. I think it's up there. It's in my top 5 books. I just love it. Every bit of it is just wonderful. But you can imagine 160 years ago, basically what the book's about is that Thoreau wanted to get away from the busyness of life. I mean, can you imagine it 160 years ago, right? Thinking that life was a bit too busy and a bit too chaotic, and what our lives are like now. And then he retreated to the woods in Concord, Massachusetts, to a place called Wouldnt, which was the pond, and he literally built himself a cabin and he lived by the pond and he documented his life basically, and his philosophy around life of basically stripping it back to the most core essentials. As he sort of said himself, I'll paraphrase, he basically just wanted to look at life in the eye, at its most basic, and see, was it still fulfilling and was it worth sticking around for, to be a part of, for want of a better way to describe it. And it just tells that story, and it's just beautiful. He just lives this most simplistic life, grows all his own vegetables, which he eats, so he's predominantly plant-based, which is a really interesting part of the whole experiment. He's on his own, it's that solitude, he's completely immersed in nature, he's away from the business of life. His costs are absolutely shrunk to almost zero, and it's just a beautiful book. And anyway, that book has just stuck with me. I just love that idea, and I think many of us are drawn to that idea of just sort of getting away from it all and getting back to that simplicity that we've lost in the chaos of the modern world that we live in. And then that book led me to minimalism, and I got really interested in the concept of minimalism. 2 guys in particular, the Minimalists. You can check them out, minimalist.com. They've got a podcast and they've got a great documentary on Netflix. Check that out. And the whole concept of minimalism is that you can do a lot more with less. So it's not about deliberately getting rid of all your worldly goods so that actually you end up living this, unhappy, unvibrant life. The opposite. It's like, well, what can you actually minimalize or remove from your life that's going to give you more freedom and space? Maybe that's because actually when you remove a lot of the things in your life, you're under less financial pressure, for example. Therefore, maybe you don't have to work in a certain job to earn a certain level of income, because actually you've removed so much of the fluff or the material out of your life that actually wasn't serving you and was keeping you trapped in working in a certain way. That sort of concept behind it. And they take it to the extreme. And there's people that, will live in just a suitcase, effectively, right? Just total simplification of life. And I am fascinated by it, and it's influenced my decisions, in truth. Probably, again, 8, 9 years ago when I really got into this stuff and started to look at it, I had some big personal decisions coming up about my career at that point, in terms of the broken business that I set up, about what to do next. Do I go for the bigger, super duper house and all this sort of stuff? And I knew at that point I was on the precipice of massive, massive change in my life. Had I gone for it and taken that next step, which feels like the standard step if you're in the city and you're working in that type of environment, it's just more and more up, up, up. Had I taken that step, I wouldn't be here. Fact, I would have been locked into a job that, don't get me wrong, has been a wonderful experience to me, and I still love that industry of broking. But it wasn't serving me anymore in terms of my meaning and purpose. I didn't feel fulfilled in that job at all. In fact, I'd stopped enjoying it because of that lack of meaning and purpose and fulfillment. But had I made that decision, that standard decision that I think too many people make, I wouldn't be here. I would have been locked in that role for a very long time. But it was that experience of minimalism and Henry Thoreau and actually looking at life differently that made me pause for just long enough to go, right, hold on. do we actually need to do this next big leap on that ladder? Because what does that mean? Well, it means definitely now I'm going to have some huge super duper mortgage that I've got to pay off, that is going to keep me in necessity that I have to earn a certain level of income to be able to do that. Therefore, my options are cut right down. I can probably only ever achieve that within one career that I know, which is broken. But we didn't. You know, after that pause, we just kept it was just long enough, and it was just at the right time that we didn't make that decision. And lo and behold, a year or so later, when I started to have that time to think, I started to realize, do you know what, I want to do something different. And fortunately, I was in the position to do that now, because there was less of those pressures around me. And that ultimately led to all the things that have led me to this point, from the One Year No Beer mission to walking away from that career to do this full time, to writing the books, to going back and doing the degrees. That all really flowed, a lot of that, from those big decisions that came from a bigger understanding of the important things in life, which I think we're all starting to discover are the simple things. So to the point is this: why is this all important? Well, because I think this current situation that we're in has basically enforced minimalism on us all to a degree. Like, it's closed down so many of those old options, and actually at the same time I think it's gifted us this opportunity to start to figure out what is really important in our life. And maybe it is the simple things, which it is. I keep going on about this all the time. It is the simple things that are the most important. You know, if you're lucky enough to have nice food, family connection, moving your body like once a day, like, because of the simplification of what's happened in our lives, I think it's made lots of people that I'm talking to anyway realize what is important. And the things that are important are like getting a good night's sleep, right? Because we've got less social distraction, or less like of the busyness and stress of commuting to the cities or whatever it is every day. Like, eating really quality, nutritious, home-cooked food, for example, is really important. And the simple stuff, maybe it's spending more time out in the garden, right? Because we can't go outside as much. Maybe it's exercising just once a day and not going to some super duper, class that's costing us a fortune. It's just going for a run around the block. Maybe it's the fact that you can connect with people in different ways that you never thought possible before, such as like house party or online or whatever it is. Maybe like the online communities are offering you lots of connection. Maybe it's that you've been enforced to work from home, and you've realized, do I need to make that commute every day? That like hour or 2 hours of like dead time and stress? Can I just work from home? Maybe, and these are all positives, maybe it's that a career will have ended or a job will have been lost. These things are going to be really tough times to come back from, but maybe again, even in those struggles, there's opportunities to go, do you know what? Maybe there's a chance, because of this experience, to build back anew from a much more simple standpoint that will put less pressure on us as a family or as an individual to just go after all this traditional material wealth that we're all sort of, too many people are chasing, and so many people are unhappy. I see it all the time. You would not believe the conversations that I have with the people that I coach, from literally multi-millionaires in the most amazing, on the surface of it, industries and professions, and they hate it, right? And I know everything's relative, right? So to them, in their position, they hate it. There's no meaning, there's no purpose. They want out, but they're locked in, right? And that, in many ways, on a relative basis, is a horrible place to be. But let's park that for a moment. So just back to the story. I think this is an opportunity maybe to reflect on a Sunday about the important things in life. So here's a couple of questions. If I get kicked off Facebook, I don't think I will by doing this. I'm a bit unsure if I will. Actually, I'm just going to do this. Stay there. Right, cool. This might work better. I'm going to move that over there. Move that there. Cool. All right, so I just thought for a Sunday, I'm not going to stay much longer because it is Sunday. Maybe it's a time to ask a few reflective questions. Maybe it's time to give yourself a bit of this space and opportunity to think a bit differently because of this enforced environment that we're in, and actually use this time wisely and productively to just take a deep breath, forget about the traditional route that everyone seems to be marching on. Because here's another thing that Mark Twain said, another brilliant American: whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And I think, in truth, the majority have it wrong. Look around you, I think they do. Maybe it's time to pause and reflect about the simple things. So, a couple of questions. And if you're on my emailing list, so if you've signed up or registered to the website andyramage.com, I'll send you these questions a bit later and a post and whatnot. But anyway, okay, so here's some questions. Just think about these to reflect on maybe on this Sunday afternoon. What lessons can you take from this experience as to the really important things in life? Okay, how does it feel to be totally reliant on others for your food? And what can you do about this? Right, that's been a really interesting one for me, by the way, just to pause on that question. That sense of, like, I've got to go to the supermarket, yet there's a garden out there that's doing nothing, consistently doing nothing. Yet there's an opportunity, right, to reconnect with nature. I've been talking about gardening and whatnot a lot. Maybe there's an opportunity to at least start to grow some produce in your own garden to take the pressure off these type of situations. That could be a real green shoot that comes out of this experience. Next question. What are the simple things you're enjoying the most? What are the simple things you're enjoying the most? Next one. How does it feel to get to know your neighbours and your community a bit better? Right, and how could you make that last? Again, that's been another real positive out of this, getting to know the neighbours in that real sense. Everyone's waving at each other and saying hello. Like, where I'm from, on the sort of suburbs of London, that just doesn't happen. It's really not, that side of it has been really nice. And just a caveat before I go on, obviously, there's so many negatives to this whole thing, and people are losing their lives, and people are losing their jobs and their income, and there's going to be a lot of hardship to follow, but you appreciate where I'm coming from with this, right? I'm not ignoring that or pretending it's not there. I'm just trying to actually get us to look at this in a slightly different way, because I think we need to going forward. Next question. How can you give back? I think fundamentally meaning and purpose comes from being in service of others, giving back to others. How can you give back? Maybe through the work that you do, or a side hustle, a business that does good in the world, or just a volunteer. What things don't you need to be content and happy and fulfilled? What things don't you need? Right, sort of a reverse way of looking at it, but like, what are the things you've realised, you know, I don't need any of that stuff to be relatively content and happy? How could you be happier and less stressed if you were able to simplify your life? Next question. Do you need to travel as much? That's a big question. We've all got to start asking ourselves over the coming weeks and months and years, regardless of this situation, due to another impending situation that's just around the corner. Last one. While you have lost some connection, like in a physical sense, have you gained new ways to connect that have been almost as powerful? And I think that's another important one. I think we've realised, actually, because thankfully for modern technology, we're a bit more connected than we realised. Even if we feel like we've lost connection, it's a bit easier to get in sort of front of people via video, via online groups like this, lives, than actually we'd ever really considered before. And I think that in itself has been a big awakening for us. And maybe that means we have to travel a bit less. And maybe that means we can stay more connected with our family and our friends, even though we might not be in the same physical location as them. Anyway, those questions, I will send them out a bit later on a post, on an email, to anyone that cares. Hopefully that was enjoyable. This is a nice Sunday, great time to reflect. Whip out the journal. Here's mine. It's the world's biggest journal right now. Look at the size of that. That is a monster of a journal. But I love it, right? Because I've got loads of extra space on there. But maybe just use this time on a Sunday to reflect on a few of those questions and just see what comes up for you. Cool. All right, let's do this.